What's going on, everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be doing a 3-month review of the Ayaneo Slide. If you're not familiar with this device, that's totally fine. We're going to go over a lot of stuff in this video. But yeah, I've had this in my possession for 3 months, had a lot of time to spend with it. It's been on 3 trips with me. And overall, I do think it's a great handheld, but there are a few things that I personally don't like. So in this video, we're going to be going over everything, like the upgraded performance, given that we've got new AYANEO Space updates and a BIOS update, which actually allows us to take the RAM up to 7500 megahertz, which does help out with a lot of games and that iGPU. I've also had a lot of time to kind of analyze the battery life here at different TDPs and heat produced around the rear at higher TDPs. So from AYANEO Space with the Ayaneo Slide, we can go up to 28 watts with this APU. And speaking of that, this is powered by the Ryzen 7 7840U. This is the 32 gig model, so we've got 32 gigs of RAM and a 2 terabyte M.2 SSD. Plenty of storage, plenty of RAM here. And the Slide is coming in a lot smaller than the Steam Deck or the ROG Ally. It's definitely one of the smaller 7840U powered devices on the market. Now, of course, the standout feature of the Ayaneo Slide is this slide-up screen with the hidden keyboard. As you can see, it is an RGB backlit keyboard. With the newer versions of AYANEO Space, we do have a few different modes that we can use, like the gradient mode, which kind of changes the whole keyboard color for us. We've also got RGB around those analog sticks, something that Ayaneo does with most of their devices. We can go ahead and slide that keyboard up at any time, and I'll tell you, it's pretty satisfying, the click and sound it makes. It's also adjustable, so we can actually tilt it just a bit. And even when I'm not using this keyboard, I actually find myself playing my games with the screen up. Not sure why, just kind of personal preference, but obviously you don't need to do that. You can always have it closed if you're playing games on it. Typing on the built-in keyboard while holding the device in kind of handheld mode will work out if you've got larger hands, but as you can see, you do kind of have to stretch to get to the middle with your thumbs. So usually with this, I do the one-handed approach, holding it with my left, typing with the right, and I can get everything I need done with this keyboard. There's also an on-screen keyboard, and we can use the analog sticks to control our mouse pointer on screen. We've also got the clickable buttons. Ayaneo has done a pretty good job about getting this done. That way we can easily navigate windows with just the built-in controller. And I do find myself using the built-in keyboard more than the on-screen keyboard. I don't mind sliding this thing up and down multiple times if I need to. When it comes to the built-in controls, the analog sticks are the switch-sized Hall-based analog sticks. Kinda wish we had full size here, but there's not a lot of room to work with. The face buttons are using a conductive pad behind them, so they feel really good. And of course, the D-pad here is Ayaneo's D-pad, which is one of my favorites. I think the roll, feel, and the firmness of it is great. It's not too firm, it's not too wiggly, it's just a really good D-pad, and they've done an amazing job in the past with those, so I was kind of expecting the same thing here, and they definitely put it in the Slide. With these Ayaneo devices, we do have AYANEO Space, so we can fully control basically every aspect of this. From changing the RGB around the analog sticks, we can change the RGB on that built-in keyboard, adjust the TDP, fan control, we can limit the FPS, and even update drivers from AYANEO Space. Now, the one thing I wish they would have added to this was a 120Hz display. This is a 6-inch IPS with a resolution of 1920 by 1080. It's a 16:9 aspect ratio, but it's only 60 Hz. So we don't have FreeSync or variable refresh rate. And the other thing I don't like about this display is it's not a native landscape display. So there are some overlays that kind of get confused and go in portrait mode while you're playing a game. Mainly the built-in AMD overlay without a lot of tweaks. I've got this device fully updated from the BIOS to the newest version of AYANEO Space, and now with AYANEO Space 2.0, we do have this minimal display, which does come in handy if you don't want to take up half your screen. Even while you're playing a game, you can have this enabled. It'll give us basically all the information we need to know from the FPS, fan speed, heat, RAM usage, and our TDP. So if you don't want to use another app while you're playing, it takes up a little bit of the screen, you can always use the minimal overlay. Next up, wanted to show off a little bit of gameplay, and first one we have here is Cyberpunk 2077. Remember, I do have the RAM on this running at 7500 MHz, so we did see a nice little boost in GPU performance. I personally run the Ayaneo Slide at an 18-watt TDP, and with this here, we're seeing some pretty decent performance with that new BIOS update. It's really not that bad given that we're running at this lower wattage, and this will definitely help us save a lot of battery life as opposed to running this at 28 watts or full boat all the way out. And with Cyberpunk 2077, we're at 900p low settings at 18 watts, seeing an average of around 72 FPS. And running at 18 watts is also going to keep the rear heat down. At 28 watts, this can get a bit toasty. I've been running at 28 watts for about 7 minutes right now with Cyberpunk 2077, and just taking a look at the rear temps here, some areas do reach up to 106 degrees Fahrenheit, and this is Fahrenheit, not Celsius. It's not hot enough to burn you, but some people might feel a little uncomfortable with this thing running at full boat, 28 watts, because yeah, it does get warm around here. I also wanted to show off this D-pad in action, and nothing's changed from my initial review. I personally love these Ayaneo D-pads, and on a few of their newer devices, they did go a different route. Kind of wish they would have stuck with this because, yeah, I mean, it is a really great D-pad for fighting games. It's got some awesome roll, it's not too firm, it's not too soggy, and in my opinion, yeah, these are some of the best D-pads that we've seen on these x86 gaming handhelds so far. With these next 3 games, I'm just going to be setting this down stationary. I'm using an Xbox controller connected over Bluetooth. Forza Motorsport, 900p low settings. It's actually the dynamic low, but I've got an uncapped FPS. And you might notice I'm running this game at 28 watts. This is one of those games that just doesn't do well at lower wattages if you want to run at or over 60. Now at 18 watts, you could run this at 30 FPS, but right now we're getting an average of 63. For the last couple weeks, I've been really impressed with the performance of Helldivers on these iGPUs. Low settings, 900p, we're seeing an average of around 72 FPS, and we're only at an 18 watt TDP. Obviously, taking that wattage up a bit more will net us more FPS, or we could up that resolution to 1080. About 22 watts, low settings, 1080 does a really good job. You get an average of around 68 FPS. And the final newer game I wanted to show off here was Horizon Forbidden West. We're at a 28 watt TDP, and you might notice I have the AMD overlay going, and that's because we're actually about to enable AMD fluid motion frames. This is something I've been using quite a bit on these iGPUs recently, and it can really up that frame rate, but it will introduce a little bit of latency. For me, in single player games, I don't mind this because in most cases, we can double our frame rate with fluid motion frames enabled. From the AMD settings, we're just going to go ahead and enable this. VSync must be off and you have to be in full screen or exclusive full screen mode, but this can most of the time double your frame rate. With this game here, we're not quite getting double. We were averaging around 48 FPS, 720p, low at 28 watts. Now with fluid motion frames enabled, or otherwise known as frame gen, we're up in the mid 70s with this game on the Ayaneo Slide. The next thing I wanted to talk about here was battery life, and with the Ayaneo Slide we get a 46.2 watt-hour battery with 65 watt PD fast charging. With my testing, screen brightness was at 50%, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth on, and I've got an uncapped frame rate for Cyberpunk 2077, running on a loop 3 times from 100% battery to 0% until the whole thing shuts off. At a 10 watt TDP, it managed to get 1 hour and 53 minutes. At a 15 watt TDP, 1 hour and 26 minutes, and at a 20 watt TDP, 1 hour and 12 minutes. So when it comes to overall gaming performance on the Ayaneo Slide, it's right on par with other devices using this same chip, the Ryzen 7 7840U. We do have faster RAM than some devices on the market, so benchmarks might be a bit higher. You can get a few more frames here and there at the same TDP as opposed to something running slower RAM. I do love the built-in keyboard, and obviously that's one of the main draws to the Slide. There are a lot of different handhelds on the market, especially a lot of different handhelds from Ayaneo out there, so having that keyboard is really awesome. But it's far from a perfect device. Now the main thing that I'm seeing here is the display. It is a 6-inch. I do like the look of it. Ayaneo has always done a good job choosing their IPS screens, but it doesn't support variable refresh rate or FreeSync, and it's not a native landscape display, which could cause problems with different overlays, and even some older games might not scale properly because after all, it's meant to be a portrait display. We've just kind of tricked it from the Windows settings to go to landscape mode when everything boots up. So yeah, this is something I think that Ayaneo really needs to source. Real landscape displays with VRR. And you know, they do come out with a ton of different handhelds, of course, with different screen sizes. But given the state of the market right now, a lot of manufacturers of these handhelds are using VRR and native landscape displays, which really does make a difference in the end. Personally, I do like the form factor here. It might be coming in a bit smaller than some people are used to when you take a look at the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally, but this is a very portable device. Heat buildup on the rear at those higher TDPs doesn't bother me, but some people may be a bit sensitive, so definitely keep something like that in mind. But yeah, I mean, it's not the most powerful device on the market. It's not perfect. Unfortunately, we haven't really seen a perfect device hit yet, but the Steam Deck OLED does come really, really close. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. Really appreciate you watching. I've really been enjoying this device. It's not getting the best battery life. We don't have that native landscape display, but it definitely gets the job done with AAA gaming at the correct TDP. If you want to learn a little more about the Ayaneo Slide, I will leave links in the description to Ayaneo's website. And if you've got any questions or want to see anything else running on this, let me know in the comments. But that's it for this one. And like always, thanks for watching.